Good evening. Man, the crowd is better tonight. If I didn't know better, I'd say you all had a bunch of fair weather Christians. I can't believe things like tornadoes would keep some of y'all from coming to Wednesday night Bible study. It sure was nice driving down tonight without having to use the windshield wipers. And in fact, I told somebody a while ago, we were at staff meeting this morning, and somebody asked me about being at Leoma, and I told them about how much I enjoyed it and how the weather had been, and one of them said, if I were them, I'd ask you not to come back. Thank you for not doing that. I will also tell you that it is really enjoyable for us to be here, and in fact, the first night that we were here, in fact, we hadn't got out of the parking lot yet on Wednesday night, and Tina said, if we ever quit going to West 7th, Leoma's where I want to go. And she doesn't say that. We go to a lot of different places and meet with a lot of different churches, and I've never heard her say that. And so she and I feel the same about how we feel so welcomed here and love being with you all, and it's good to be at Leoma. Had a good meal with Rodney and Chastity and their family, and I probably enjoyed our conversation as much as I've had in a long time. Rodney and I talked at Magnolia Bible College, and I did a lot of work with them. I was on the board at Magnolia for a few years, and I loved that school. And being reminded that Rodney's a graduate of Magnolia makes me continue to appreciate how much good that little bitty college in the middle of Mississippi has done such great things, and I know you all benefit from it greatly and are so glad to have them here at Leoma. Well, let's get into the lesson, and I don't know if I'll get through with this tonight or not. We got one more week, one more night next Wednesday night, and so I encourage you to be back next Wednesday night. We're going to talk about the role of making the Lord and the church important to our children and how we do that. And so I hope that will be helpful to us. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I believe, that I believe there's absolutely nothing harder to think of in the world than to think about a child not being saved. And if we will stop long enough and think about the importance of that and think of what really is at stake, then what we have to say next week and what we will be talking about truly should matter. And so I hope it will be helpful. Well, you all, some of you know, many of you know that I kind of slowed down in week 2 because the crowd was small and took 2 weeks to get through that lesson. And so tonight I'm trying to get through 2 lessons in one. And I doubt that I will make it. And so I'm going to go as quickly as I can while hopefully giving emphasis to what I need to give emphasis to. And if I don't make it, we'll stop and pick up where I quit about 9 o'clock tonight. So I'm just kidding. You all have already gone to sleep on me, haven't you? Tonight we're talking about 2 things. We're talking about raising children that are humble and confident, and I believe, as we will discuss, that you can be both. Part 1. And then part 2, the importance of parents being consistent while not being perfect, or consistency in the midst of mistakes. It is the case that raising children who have strong self-esteem and are good with who and what they are is so very important. It's what matters. It's what enables them to feel good about being God's child. It's what enables them to not have to feel like they need approval from others and to give in to peer pressure and to do things to be seen and to do things to get attention because they badly need it. And we're going to talk tonight about this whole concept of how important it is to realize that and to work with that as we raise our children. Now, one of the things I want to say as we begin tonight is what I said the first night, and that is it's almost scary to realize that God gives us a baby, a child, and says, here, keep it alive, treat it in such a way, train it in such a way, him or her, such that they believe in me and are faithful to me and come home and live with me eternally. And we have no greater responsibility in life than that one. However, we are as inexperienced as it gets. We've never done this before. And it is also the case that once you think you've got it figured out, then you'll have child number 2, and everything that worked with child number 1 doesn't work with child number 2 or works very differently. And there's so many pieces of the puzzle, it really is a challenge. And if ever, James 1 verse 5, where James told us, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him, but let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. Let not that man think he shall receive anything of the Lord. If ever there were a passage that applied to parenting, it ought to be James 1:5 and following. Because if ever we need to ask God to give us wisdom, it is in trying to raise children. And so let's try to develop this. And we'll look at some scriptures as we begin. And these scriptures have to do with the problem of arrogance and haughtiness, or pride, and how important it is for us to raise our children where they're not proud, they're not arrogant, they're not cocky, as we might say. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 11 verse 2, when pride comes, then disgrace is going to come. But with humility comes wisdom. Humility, what a desirable trait in others. But how difficult it is for us to develop it ourselves. Ephesians 6 verse 4, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. And we'll talk more about this verse and this concept as we go. So tonight, in this first part, we're going to look at two different emphases. The first one is we cannot expect our children to be humble and develop humility if we don't practice humility. And number 2 goes back to the first thing that I said there, and that is, so how do we truly raise children that are humble? Now, before I go on, let me talk about this just for a minute and kind of bring it down to what's real. And what's real is a lot of how humble a child is or a person is has to do with their personality. If you've had more than one child, or if you've had several child especially, you may have had one that was just humble from day one. They would do something for somebody else and not come and tell you. They would do the right thing and not feel the need for others to know. They just were fine with being a person of humility. And then child number 2 comes along, or maybe it's reverse. First child may be the one who had trouble, and the second one was the one who had humility. But because of the way genes fall into place and the way birth order comes into play and the way all these pieces, and we'll look at some more of these in a little bit, come into play, there are so many different factors to this. And for child A, it may be a major struggle, and child B, they just were ingrained with humility. And I realize that's the case. And so how especially do we take the child, the son or the daughter who needs that extra pat on the back, the son or daughter who needs attention and works harder to get attention, the one who has a harder time feeling good with himself or herself, how do we help them to be what God and we want them to be? Well, let's go back to the first part and start with us. Again, we can't expect them to be people of humility, children of humility, if we aren't. First part of this, and I think the biggest part of this, is we must be parents who are willing to admit our mistakes. And I often say, as I talk about this in different ways and in different settings and even with different topics, that my parents' generation were a generation, many of which did not use the words "I'm sorry" very often. Now, why? Well, we could talk a long time about that. But I think the same generation who had a little harder time using the words "I love you," same generation who had a little harder time giving hugs, showing affection, the generation who did a better job of putting up the wall and not showing feelings, is also the generation or the person who has a hard time admitting openly when we mess up. And how important it is for us to show our children that we are not perfect, that we make mistakes. And this source from Help for Mom Coach, apologies come hard for some of us. But when you do them with little people, they feel important. They may be thinking, I must be pretty important for Mom to say I'm sorry to me. It also allows for mistakes to be viewed as a learning point, how to move on, but with integrity. You have taken the time to apologize, maybe even explain yourself, and show that it is not the end of the world. Well, let me try to go ahead and run with that a little bit without getting too bogged down. It is the case, I believe, that when parents hide their mistakes and don't allow their children to see that they are humans too, and sometimes mess up, that our children grow up believing the expectation is perfection. If I don't let my child see my flaws, and I'm not saying we just show them every time we mess up and everything, but I'm also suggesting the opposite extreme is something we need to be careful that we not follow. When we do that, we are setting an expectation among our children that you don't make mistakes. You don't mess up. Now think with me about the implications of that. If I live in such a way that I teach my children that you're never supposed to make mistakes, they're never going to feel good enough. They're never also going to feel like God will forgive you. They may never feel like that they will deserve to be a child of God. And there's so many different implications to that, and how healthy it is for us to admit when we mess up and then handle it appropriately. It is also the case, and in fact it is very much the case, that it is a big deal for our young people to feel accepted and popular. Now watch this. If you don't believe that it's a big deal to them, just go back a few years when you were in school. I don't care how old we are. Every one of us in this room when we were kids remember times when we wanted to be popular. When we wanted to be accepted. We knew who was popular. We knew pretty well where we were on the popularity scale. Oh, I'm kind of making myself cringe even thinking about that. Boy, I'm glad I don't have to go back to that. But it was a big deal, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. And it still is. Maybe even more so. And I shared some of this a couple of years ago when I was there, but I looked back through this and I found just a couple of slides that I wanted to share again because it makes the point so well. This particular study done by CNN, so you may want to believe it, you may not want to. But particular study done by CNN, 2016, hashtag being 13 inside the secret world of teens, the study was called. Participants, more than 200 8th graders from across the nation who allowed their social media feeds to be studied by child development experts. And what were the findings? 61% of teens said they wanted to often check to see if their online posts are getting likes and comments. Now, that didn't stop when we grew up for a lot of us, did it? Because a lot of us want to see how many hits we have on Facebook, and we want to see the comments, and we still have a little of that need for others to like what we're doing. 36% of teens said they wanted to see if their friends are doing things without them. They want to feel included. 21% of teens said they wanted to make sure no one was saying mean things about them. Now, this is true, isn't it, guys? Will you help me with this? Sure, we care about what others think. We want them to like what we're doing, and we want to feel accepted. And by the way, it's not just you guys, it's these guys too. It's us guys. All of us have something within us that causes us to want to be accepted and approved by others. However, we got to be careful with that. That instinct, just like all instincts, have to be disciplined. We've got to be careful with them. And if we don't discipline our instincts, then we become no different than the animals. And that's why God sent His Son to die for us, because He expects us to be disciplined and not just do whatever we feel like doing. But getting back to the parents of these guys really have to work hard. Why? Because this is such an important thing. Notice the need to be approved and accepted. Oh, I hit the middle button. Sorry. Can I get it back? There it is. Okay, thank you. So, how do we do what we're talking about in light of all these things that are fighting us? First of all, I want to show that when we are talking about humility, we're not talking about a lack of confidence. And in fact, it is the case that those who are most humble, oftentimes, are those who are the most confident. It is those who are most lacking in confidence, who seek most to promote themselves. In other words, often those who attempt to appear most confident are actually less confident. You guys think about this. The ones at school, your friends, who are always trying to prove something, the ones who are always trying to show out, trying to pat themselves on the back, why do they do that? Why do they do that? Because they're lacking in self-esteem. Because they're needing to make sure that they get noticed. Because attention to them is a big deal. But you think about it, the opposite of that is also true. The friends that you have at school who do good things and don't have to get the pat on the back, who are good people without looking for the approval of others, without looking for being bragged on, without having to be the center of attention, they're the ones who really, generally, are okay with who they are. Now, parents, I want you to think about this. Because when we understand what it takes to help these guys feel okay with whom they are, then they are going to be people who are not giving in to all the pressure and people who want to do God's children. Why? Humble children are confident with whom they are. They don't feel a strong need to promote self. They don't feel a strong need to pretend to be something they are not. And they are not nearly as affected by peer pressure. And look at how many things contribute to a child's need for approval and acceptance. I talked about personality. Some kids in their general makeup just come out of the womb with a little more of the need to be noticed. Number two, have you read the birth order book, or you've heard the discussions about that? Birth order makes a difference. I know that firsthand. Why? When you're the second child and your older sibling to this day has never made a B in her life, you have to deal with that. And you have to live up to that. And I'm convinced that maybe even today there are times that I kind of tend to like people to tell me how good I've done. Partly because growing up, there were a lot of times that I didn't feel like I was as good as Donna. I wasn't as smart as her. She was the one who never got in trouble. You know, things like that matter. Of course they do. What would have been different had I been the firstborn? I don't know. But I know things like that affect relationships with parents. So many times in the counseling room, I talk especially to females who bring up the relationship that they had with their father growing up, and how that contributes to whom they are and some of the things they wrestle with. Well, sometimes the opposite of that is also true, but it is the case that the relationships that we have with our children, especially dads, we have to work hard at this, become very important in to what degree children feel okay with whom they are. Number 4, talents and abilities. We know this is the case. You know, one of the things I loved about working with college kids, as much as I love sports, and if you're around me, you know I love sports. I've loved it all my life, but as much as I love sports, one of the things I loved about working with college kids is at the college level, you can succeed and have strong self-esteem without being athletic in the least. And in the Deep South, that's hard for these kids growing up in K-12 grades. And it's hard for them to get in the in crowd, and it's hard for them to be accepted and approved, and we'll talk more about that. But this falls into what we're talking about. Well, what about this one? We do live in a day when every kid gets a trophy. How do you feel about that? You know, when I went to Freed Hardeman on a baseball scholarship, I had, I don't know, less than 10 trophies. And I started playing ball when I was 9 years old. Now, is that the case today? You know, you might get 10 in the first year if you have a big enough party at the end of the year. So how do you feel about that? Well, I do think we live in a day where if we're not careful, we try in the wrong way to overdo the praise. And we try to overdo the making them feel good about everything. And this will come up again in just a minute. I'm not talking, when I talk about helping kids to be fine with who they are, that we just praise them and praise them and praise them unrealistically. Children who have no difficulties, continuing the thought, children who grow up with everything being hunky-dory, what's going to happen to them when they get to be adults? In fact, I was talking to a dad a while back who was frustrated because his son should have been the quarterback. You ever heard that conversation? I just don't understand. He's better, he's done this or that. You know, and I listened and I listened and I listened, and I finally called his name and I said, you know what? May absolutely be the best life lesson he will learn for a while, to realize that life's not always fair, that life's not always easy, that sometimes you have to work really hard to achieve. And I said, besides that, if he grows to be an adult and always gets what he wants, he's probably not going to be a very successful adult. You know, our kids sometimes come home the first day of school with the bad teacher. Our kids sometimes come home after being drafted in the early selection process on the teams with the coach that's not very good, or they're on the team that's not very good. They sometimes come home from school with somebody having mistreated them. And you know what? That doesn't always bother me. Well, I never wanted my children to be mistreated. I always wanted my children to win. I always wanted my children to have good teachers. But if you take a hard situation, a difficult situation, and you handle it well, oftentimes it's very helpful. And in fact, had a conversation with a 67-year-old lady today who had been through some really, really hard times. And I made the statement to her. I said, I'm sorry, you're so wise. And she looked at me and I said, through this adversity and this adversity and this adversity, you've been taken to a new level of understanding that you didn't have before, haven't you? And she said, she grinned, she said, yeah, I know. And I said, sometimes ignorance is bliss, isn't it? Well, yeah, we don't desire hard things. We certainly don't desire difficulty for our children. But when it comes, deal with it in the right way. Help them to learn from it and grow from it. Sometimes we try to overprotect them. So what do we do to help our children develop this humility and confidence? Number one, It is so very important that we discipline with love and care, not out of anger. Show disappointment and forgiveness instead of resentment. Now, I want to pause for a minute. I want you to look closely at those words. Because when we discipline out of anger, and when we cause our children to feel less than, not important, we beat them down in terms of their morale, what are we doing? We're pushing them in the direction of being one of those children who acts out, who needs the attention, who needs approval from people who oftentimes we don't want giving them approval. Why? Because we're taking their self-worth away from them. Now this one's hard. Why? Because at the end of the day, when we're tired and worn out and frustrated, and little Johnny or little Susie have just pushed us to no end, well, it's hard to keep our cool. It's hard to maintain our maturity. Sometimes we want to be instinctive too, but how important it is. Number two, it is important for us to build them up with, this is a key word, sincere praise. Sincere praise, real praise. We value them in ways that are real and accurate, not ways that are meaningless. It is so very important for us to build these guys down here up so that they feel they are as valuable as God, as they actually are to God, and as God wants them to be. Number three, home should be our comfort zone. Provide a safe, loved, appreciated, and valued environment and home. Tina often has said, I love that our kids' friends wanted to come to our house. And we did love that. Why? Well, we enjoyed them. And on the most part, I think our kids felt comfortable at home and enjoyed that. And we saw how we kind of had the opportunity to become kind of adopted parents to a lot of kids in the process. In fact, some of them we still keep up with very closely. Why? Well, we didn't always do things right, and I don't even know that I should have gone there. But it is so very important for our children to love being at home and feel comfortable being at home. Number five, and this is so important, help children to find what they are good at and support them in this. Why? Because that's truly where they build self-esteem, at least a large part of it. Helping them to find what they can do and support them. And I don't think kids have to do everything. Oh, so many different demands and so many different teams and so many different sports and cost so much money, and yeah, we can truly go too far in this in trying to help our kids find what they're good at. However, we need to be reasonable and realistic about it. And the last one, start early. You know, our firstborn grandson is 2.5, and I'm already seeing how he can go in this direction, in this direction, this direction, how things are already developing, how he's already kind of starting to become a little bit of a show-off. He knows when we laugh at him, and even at that age, when he can get us to laugh, he's already picking up on, oh wow, this is good, I like this. I like to make Papa laugh. Now, that's good. I love for him to make me laugh, and I love to see him do things that are enjoyable. But we have to be careful with that. Mom and Dad have to be careful with that. Why? Well, that old statement we've heard all of our lives, 90% of their personality is developed by the time of the age 5. I don't know scientifically how close that is in terms of the percentage points to accurate, but the concept is very real. Oh, how important it is for us to get our kids started right. When children feel inferior and deficient, they seek ways to make up for these inferiorities and deficiencies. And many of those solutions are undesirable and problematic. All right, let's go to the second part. I may make it. So how do you even deal with this topic of being consistent, especially when we're trying to figure it out, and especially when it's not really possible to be consistent with children who deal with things in different ways? Well, hopefully we can understand the importance of trying as best we can in providing consistency within the family. Once again, part of this is us realizing that we make mistakes and don't pretend to be perfect. And we can prove this or support this at least because children usually know when parents are being real. And if we think we are hiding things from our kids and don't think they know what the deal really is, go back to what it was like when you were a child and think about how you so easily knew when mom and dad were trying to hide from you that finances were tight, or they weren't getting along very well, or they didn't like a certain person even though they tried to hide that from you. Or yeah, all of us can probably go back to times when mom and dad thought that they were kind of shielding us from us, but we were aware, we knew. Well, our kids do today as well. Children need to learn as a part of this, with us teaching them by example. What do you do when you make mistakes? Well, first part of that is you own it. You admit it. And I'll sometimes ask this bunch down here, and I probably did this 2 years ago, when's the last time mom and dad told you I'm sorry? Well, don't answer out loud. You know, there were a lot of times when my son and daughter probably would have sat here and said, not very often. When's the last time moms and dads we made mistakes? We need to work pretty hard to get those two on the same place. It's also important for us to teach them how important it is to ask for forgiveness, because we often daily need to ask God to forgive us, and how important it is when we make mistakes to learn from it, to improve. How can we learn from what happened? I hate that you made this mistake, but you can overcome it. What do we need to do that? What did you learn from it? What caused you to go in that direction or do that thing? How can we fix it, and how can we learn from it? Janet Lehman from Empowering Parents made this statement. She said, being consistent is the hardest thing of all. Many parents tell us, and it's true, it's easy to lay down a rule and then let it slide. She says, when you're tired or in a hurry, and I would add to that for multiple of reasons. But look at this one. I've also found this. Sissy Goff from Faith Gateway said, there's no way to avoid consistency, how difficult it is as a person, and maybe especially as a parent. Huxley said, consistency is contrary to nature, contrary to life. The only completely consistent people are the dead. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Or, as our doctor mom friend would say, it's just not natural to do the same thing all the time. But all of the parenting experts continue to say being a consistent parent is important. Not only do I believe, the author said, consistency is one of the most important characteristics parents can possess, but it also is one I see parents struggle with every day. Maybe they struggle because they really don't know how to start. Maybe they struggle because they don't know how to stop the busyness of their lives long enough to establish, and I'll say it differently, patterns of consistency. Patterns of consistency. Well, let's develop this. And the first place I want to go is to talk about how important it is to have consistency between mom and dad, and how difficult it is. I've talked a little about this, but how important it is for mom and dad to be on the same page. And again, we can realize how difficult this is by asking the question, which parent did I ask when I was growing up when I wanted something? I guarantee you every one of us that had two parents at home can pick one of those two out, or if not, we would try to figure out which one was in a good mood. Did you ever do that? Yeah, why? Because of how difficult it is for mom and dad to be consistent. Number two, which parent did I want to discipline me when I had done something wrong? Does this one bring back memories too? Yeah, most of us. In fact, just out of curiosity for the fun of it, how many of you would rather your moms have disciplined you than your dads? So how many of you would rather your dads have disciplined you? 4 or 5. A few, yeah. Why? Well, a lot of reasons for that. We could talk about that. You won't believe how your moms and dads were watching you all just now. That was kind of fun. What about this one? Whom do our children go to or hope does the discipline? Do our children think we are on the same page? Not only with discipline, but with, Mom, can I go over to Dad, can I do this tonight? Do you care if, you guys pick one out because the one you think is most likely to give the answer? Yeah, sure. Your moms and dads did the same thing. Why? Well, because this consistency thing is difficult. Do our children think we are on the same page in discipline, in values, in moral issues? And I put in parentheses, the one that we all wrestle with, especially with daughters, in what we allow them to wear or don't allow them to wear. Again, the big question that I'm asking right now is, are we on the same page? And I'm going to show you, hopefully, why it's so important. First of all, it is important that parents back each other up. And watch this. Make it a rule that if one parent disciplines a child, the other parent must back it up, even if the other parent disagrees with the punishment. You and your spouse need to present yourselves as a unified team to your child, or it will undermine your authority as parents. That is the therefore. And I'm going to continue to try to prove that to you. But that's the part that matters. Why is it important that we are consistent and on the same page? Because if we are not, our discipline probably is not going to do what it needs to do and what we want it to do. Why? Well, watch as we continue. Also, from Empowering Parents, understand that every time you argue with your spouse over parenting, the focus shifts away from where it should be, your child's behavior. Therefore, keep the focus on your child whenever your child is present and address disagreements with your spouse in private. Now, I want you to stop and look at that, because I believe that that is so very true. When son or daughter see us differing and start playing each other against the other, when there's a discipline matter, then if mom and dad, as you'll see in another slide, begin to fight about it, oh, the attention's off them. If they cause frustration, contention, then the focus on what needs to be at the center of the focus is so far off in left field, then what happens? Well, let's continue. When parents fight, kids are off the hook. And when this happens, the child isn't held accountable for his behavior, and the unacceptable behavior continues. That makes sense, doesn't it? However, all of us are kind of sitting here right now with our toes being stepped on, because it's also the case that almost never are mom and dad exactly at the same place and do things exactly the same way. One thinks more, one thinks less. One thinks I'm being too hard, one thinks I'm being too easy. Or he thinks I'm being too hard and she thinks I'm being too easy. And so, this is tough. Remember, I said we need to pray for wisdom. In the end, your child's behavior won't change if you're more focused on fighting your spouse than holding your child accountable for his behavior. Also, from Empowering Parents, so very important that we deal with these inconsistencies when we're calm, not when we're mad. How do discussions go when we're mad? How many discussions become beneficial, helpful, problems solved when two people who are having those discussions are mad, frustrated, and hurt? What happens? Well, if I go into a discussion when I'm mad at somebody, I go in defensive. I go in wanting to make sure they hear everything I've got to say. I listen such that 3 words out of their mouth, if I can find some way to shoot down what they're trying to say, I'm going to jump all over it. That's the way we communicate when we're angry and when we're frustrated. And you've heard me say emotion is stronger than logic. And when we are angry, logic doesn't work. When we're frustrated, using if-then statements doesn't make a big difference. And if we are having problems agreeing about discipline, we got to get on the same page. And if we need to address that, we need to address that in a calm moment, away from the child, so that we can get on the same page. Talk about parenting decisions when you're calm. Calm makes it easier for you to discuss things with respect. And respect helps you find common ground because respect makes it easier for you to understand each other. When a couple loves each other to the point that they never want to hurt the other one, that's what respect is. If you are having an argument or a disagreement with your spouse and you say to him or her, "You hurt me," or if your spouse, let me turn that around, if your spouse says to you, "Oh, what you said hurt me," if the first thing out of your mouth is defensive, if you're trying to protect what you did, if you're trying to justify yourself, then there's a lack of respect there. Because there are very few things that couples can disagree about that are more important than respect that they should have for each other. And when I get to the place where I don't want to hurt my spouse no matter what, and if I do, I'm not going to go there, then I'm in a far better place to talk about what differences exist with discipline or anything else. Parents must be consistent, not only with one another, but it's important for them to be consistent that what they say and what they do are on the same page. For example, if we tell our children how important it is to love God and serve Him, and this is the most important thing in life, and our children don't see us living that way, then how effective are we going to be at teaching them that what we're saying really is the case? If they see inconsistencies, and we talk the game that we realize we need to talk, God first, others second, self third, or family second, whatever that priority list is, and if we were to take the multiple choice question, we'd get the answer right because we know how important it is for us to teach our children to love God and to do what He says. But if our children see us not doing that, what are the odds of them believing it's important? Number 2, it's important for our children to see and hear consistency when we talk about how important God's Word is. This one hurts me a little bit because quite frankly, I'm as busy as just about anybody, I think. And part of that's my own fault. But we become so busy, and our tendency is to not be studiers, to not be comprehenders, to not be understanders, but to be answer finders. And if we can Google something and get the answer, why do we need to understand why the answer is the way it is? And that's kind of the time in which we live. And because of that, I think we have put our Bibles on our phones, and therefore we don't carry one anymore. We don't really feel the need to read them as we should and study them as we should because I can Google any question I have and find the answer. And if we live that kind of life where our children grow up never seeing our Bibles open in our laps, even if it's on an iPad, but yet we tell them the Bible is so very important, they're going to go, eh. Why? Because there's inconsistency. Number 3, and we'll talk about this next week, if we tell our children the church is important and we can take it and leave it, we can go on Sunday morning and that's about it. We tell them it's important, but by the way we live, we don't show that. What about this one? Oh, Christians must tell the truth at all times. Phone rings, you answer the phone. Is so-and-so there? No, he's not home from work yet. Mom, why did you say that? Well, Dad doesn't feel well. Or what other version? Oh, how important it is for us to understand that our yea be yea and our nay be nay. And if we tell our young people, you must be a person of integrity. You must be a person who says what he means and means what he says. Telling the truth is always important. What if we discipline them because they're not truthful with us, but yet they see us doing things that are dishonest? Inconsistency. What are the odds of us raising children who believe that integrity and truth matters so very much if we're inconsistent? What about this one? Doing to others as you would have them doing to you. Oh, we said that to them many times, especially when they were little, but do we undo it by not practicing it? And we could go on and on and on. Just remember how important it is for us to be people of consistency in what we say and do. When children see continual inconsistency, they form their own behaviors and values, and especially when young, these are based on an immature sense of what's important to them. In other words, if we tell them one thing and do something else and they go, oh, it must not matter, then we just basically put in their hands, and much smaller than these guys, well, I'm going to do what I think ought to be done based on what matters to me. And if they begin seeing inconsistencies very early in life and start trying to figure out what matters to them, you know what's going to matter to them? Instinct, desires, all those things that sometimes cause them to go in directions they don't need to go. Well, I've truly just touched the hem of the garment tonight, but I hope there has been a nugget, or maybe more than one, that will help you as you go and strive to be parents that God wants us to be. It starts with being a child of God, and so we always encourage people to put God first in their lives. If you've not yet become a child of God, begin tonight by putting Him on baptism, putting His Son on baptism, repenting of your sins, confessing Jesus to be God's Son, and to walk faithfully, showing truly your family and all that God matters. It may be you need to come tonight saying, I need to say I'm sorry, or I need to show my children that I've made mistakes, or I want to ask for the prayers of this church. If you need to come, we'd encourage you to while we stand and sing.